أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدًا عبده ورسوله سيد المرسلين وخاتم النبيين ورحمة للعالمين وصلى الله على آله الطاهرين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا أوصيكم عباد الله ونفسي بتقوى الله. The situation in the Middle East is becoming more precarious, more dangerous. And according to the UN Secretary General, hell is breaking loose in Lebanon. Israel, which claims to have the ability to be very precise in hitting its own targets, is again doing the same thing that it has been doing with the Gaza Strip, which is indiscriminate attack on civilians and non-combatants, killing children and women. You must have seen the example of in the news, in the Canadian news, about an elderly couple who are Canadian by their nationality, but Lebanese. And, they're aged 74 and 69, and they were killed while fleeing in their car from southern Lebanon. Because their car was actually targeted by a missile. And according to the son who went to look for them from Beirut, he says, we saw the burnt out car, and even the bodies were burnt out. Only thing that I could see was the ring of my mother in the car. And so this, when we talk about this indiscriminate attack on civilians, this seems to be the pattern of the Israeli way in dealing with those that they are fighting. Even our foreign minister, Melanie Joly, she also in her social media condemned, especially referring to these two elderly Canadians, that the killing of these two innocent people who were fleeing violence in an IDF strike. We refuse to let civilians bear the cost of this conflict. More than 600 people have been killed in Lebanon, including 50 children. Thousands have been wounded, and more than 9,000 people have been forced to leave their homes. And this is where we see, especially the example of U.S. policy on this issue. And this is what I would call, it is an example of par excellence when it comes to hypocrisy. We have been hearing for the entire year, on the one hand, Biden and his administration constantly saying that there must be a ceasefire in Gaza. But on the other hand, it's the same government which is actually providing weapons to the state of Israel. Just this year's number, and we are not talking about business deal, we are talking about military aid given by U.S. to Israel amounts to $8.7 billion. And among the, weapons that they shipped to Israel, according to this report of 3 months ago, actually, 1,800 of these were bombs weighing 2,000 pounds each. So you're not really targeting one individual or one small group. You are actually looking at, destroying the entire neighborhood in that way. Even Biden himself, when they temporarily put a pause on these kinds of weapons that they were sending in the month of April, he was forced to acknowledge that civilians have been killed. These are his words. Civilians have been killed in Gaza as consequences of these bombs. I have made it clear to Bibi and his war cabinet they are not going to get our support if in fact they go on those population centers. But nobody cares about his words as far as the Israeli officials are concerned. And we see that the Israeli lobby still prevails. Looking at the tragedy unfolding now in Lebanon, the Grand Ayatollah Sistani's office in Najaf issued a statement on Monday condemning the brutal aggression, which has caused civilian deaths and displacement of thousands. And the statement also expresses condolence and praying for those who have been killed and wounded, but also the words are calls for every possible effort to stop this ongoing barbaric aggression and protect the Lebanese people from its devastating effects, and for all believers to contribute in any way to alleviate their suffering and secure their humanitarian needs. Heeding to this call of the Grand Marja, the ISIJ, our organization here, has sent $100,000 for humanitarian relief through a reputable Canadian organization which has workers on the ground in Lebanon. And, I will appeal to you also if you want to support in that cause through the Jamaat on this issue. This is the least that we can do besides the issue of, praying for them, that may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep them under his protection and hasten the appearance of the Imam, Ajjalallahu ta'ala faraju sharif, sooner. Remember that Lebanon has a, very long history of the presence of the Shia population there. It's interesting that when you look at it from the historical point of view, that entire region in the early history, before the First War, so we're just talking about, just a little bit more before a century, the term used for that entire region was Asham. In our Farsi, Urdu, Gujarati, when we say Sham these days, in our mind we are talking about Syria. Whereas historically, before the First World War, the word Sham applied to Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and the entire Palestine. So Sham was a very, vast area. I remember when I was doing my master's thesis on the modern Middle East, one of the documents I saw through in the looking at the interwar period, one of the documents was actually not relevant to my theme, but I took a picture of this letterhead of the Consulate General of the United States of America. This is before the First War. And the address they had was the address of Jerusalem. After Jerusalem, there was a comma, Jerusalem, Syria. So, when we are talking about the words also, we should know the history that when we talk about Sham, it is a very vast area. And the presence of Shias, especially in Lebanon, that part of Sham, it itself is a testimony to the truth of the Shia madhab. Sham was the area where Banu Umayyah, had control from very beginning during the days when the Muslims took over the area. In spite of this anti-Ali and anti-Alawid or anti-Shi'i, propaganda of Banu Umayyah, you still see from very early days, the presence of Shias in that region. Many times people think that, Shiaism started with the Safavids in Iran. This is, they don't know history at all. If you realize when the Safavid came to power about 400 or 500 years ago in Iran, and that is where the Shia Mazhab in Iran got strength. Before that, majority of them were Sunni. At that time, the Safavid kings didn't have much source as far as religious guidance is concerned. And they asked help from the ulama in Iraq and Lebanon. And some of the prominent early ulama of the Safavid era in Iran were those who came from Lebanon to guide and, preach about the Shia Mazhab. And so even this, religious or cultural ties between Lebanon and Iraq and Iran have been historically a long relationship, which cannot be just, brushed aside when you talk about, modern borders of the Middle East at the moment. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, bring about the situation of peace so that the civilians would be saved from this zulm which is going on in that region. إن أحسن الحديث كتاب الله العزيز بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحليم الكريم غافر الذنب وقابل التوبة وهو الغفور الرحيم ونشهد أن لا إله إلا هو العطوف للعباد بجوده والعواد على المذنبين بحلمه ونشهد أن محمدا نبيه وحبيبه سيد المرسلين وشفيع المذنبين ورحمة للعالمين صلى الله عليه وآله الداعين إلى سبيل الله بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة قادة الأمم وأولياء النعمة ومعدن رحمة أوصيكم عباد الله بتوبة ما سلف من ذنوبكم. On the local level, there has been call to dedicate today's Friday khutbah in remembering the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation, which is commemorated every year on September 30th. And this is regarding the indigenous people in our own land here. The National Day of Truth and Reconciliation is actually to reflect on the legacy of genocide and injustice that the indigenous people continue to suffer since their first contact with the Europeans who arrived about 500 years ago. The indigenous scholars and those who are studying the history of Canada, they have popularized a concept, and that is known as the settler colonialism. And this refers to the system of power that depends on the settlers displacing indigenous inhabitants to create a fundamentally unequal society. Basically, when the Europeans came to North America, the way they treated these indigenous people, their language was wiped out, their culture and religion was totally erased. And one of the ways they did it was through the residential schools. We have been hearing about that quite a lot in the last few years, where they would take the children of the indigenous tribes by force and placed them in the residentials and the boarding schools, which were interestingly run by Christian churches on behalf of the Canadian government. And that is where, the Pope was there was pressure on him to come and acknowledge that zulm done, especially by the Catholic Church. They ran most of these residential schools, and other groups also in the Christian, churches did the same thing. And one of the things they used to do was when they take them away at that young age and force them to learn English, even if they had two children from same family, they would separate them because they would then be talking in their own language, remembering their own family and things like that. And I remember in one of the visits I had with a group of religious scholars who were invited by the York Region Police, actually. They have a diversity department. And they invited us to go and visit one of these tribes just in north, in Georgina there. And the presentation they made there, they said that these children will stay there for many, many years. And when they come back to us, the parents would not be able to communicate with them because they don't know the language. And the faith that they have been taught is the Christian faith. And this is where, when we talk about this issue, we are in this land. We cannot forget the history of the indigenous people here. And this actually ties into our, current situation in the Middle East, especially Palestine. The story of the indigenous people in Canada is very much similar to the story of the Palestinians in Middle East. And we can actually use this term, settler colonialism, which is used by the historians of the indigenous people here, to describe how the State of Israel was formed in 1948, but the country's aspirations for the remaining Palestinian territories is still there. They would like to just forget that there are no more Palestinians here. And, some of the activists these days in the last 1 year for the Palestinian cause, they actually were able to relate with the suffering of the Palestinian by understanding this concept of settler colonialism. And so this is what I mentioned before, that we have to recognize our own environment. This is not a Muslim society. You want to talk about Palestine with a non-Muslim audience, you say this is Qibla Awwal. They wouldn't understand what it is. Or what is the importance of Qibla Awwal. Qibla Awwal is important for Muslims, but they wouldn't be able to relate to that. Or you bring the issue of, Muslimin and Yahud. Again, it will be a block. If you really want things to be understandable to the general, Canadian here, a common person, you will have to use these terms like settler colonialism. This is where they will be able to relate to this issue. And this is where, you have to localize the struggle of the people and the suffering of the Palestinian people by relating that to the suffering of the indigenous people in North America. Since I'm on this, let me, we just had the Milad of the Prophet last week, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Let me make one comment in a very general way. I'm not being very precise here. But in general, if you compare the record of the Muslim rulers, and we are not saying all of them were good, but wherever they went, when they imposed their government on other countries, whether it is surrounding areas, or even Spain or India, they didn't have this idea or policy of erasing the language of the local people, or even changing or forcing, their religion in that way. We always have this distinction in history between expansion of the Muslim empire, which was done by military force, but that does not automatically translate into spread of the Islamic faith. You had Iran, or Fars as they called it those days, conquered during the time of the Khulafa, early days. But then you go to the time of Khalifa Umar ibn Abdul Aziz. We are talking about 5 or 6 Imams' time. And the Khalifa sends letters to the governor of Fars as well as in Egypt, asking them that why these people are still not Muslims. He didn't realize that his ancestors were more, interested in getting jizya from these people. They didn't want them to become Muslim. It was not really spreading Islam. It was more having your political domination there. And so this is even in Spain, Muslims ruled for centuries. But they didn't eliminate Christianity there, force people to become Muslims. And that is why they lost out at the end, actually, because they were never in a majority. Even in India, Muslims were never in a majority, although Muslims ruled there for centuries. So overall, when you look at the history of the Muslims, we can say that at least Muslims don't have this kind of an agenda where you go and wipe out the entire culture and language of a people where you have colonialized them. And this credit goes to none other than this Rahmatun lil Alameen sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. اللهم صل على سيد المرسلين وشفيع المذنبين نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وعلى إمام المتقين وأمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب صلوات الله عليه وعلى سيدة نساء العالمين سيدتنا فاطمة بنت رسول الله صلوات الله عليها وعلى سيد شباب أهل الجنة الحسن المجتبى والحسين الشهيد بكربلاء عليهم الصلاة والسلام والأئمة المسلمين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي عليهم الصلاة والسلام. اللهم صل على مولانا الحجة بن حسن صاحب العصر والزمان ما أحيا آثار البدء وطغيان هادم أمنية الشرك والنفاق حاسد فر البغي والشقاق صلوات الله وسلامه عليه وعلى آبائه الكرام ما اتصلت الليالي والأيام. اللهم عجل فرج وسهل مخرجه واكحل ناظرنا بنظرة منا إليه واجعلنا من المستشهدين بين يديه. اللهم اجعلنا ممن يذكر فتنفعه الذكرى. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون.